Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my contemplations for the week of July 24th, 2023. And as always, my invitation is for you to give yourself the permission to tune inwards and to allow your system and your being to notice where in these contemplations something resonates, and to trust that that's the thing you're supposed to be working with. We're all walking different paths, we're all living different lives, and so my hope is that these contemplations will inspire you to feel more deeply into what is uniquely and specifically pertinent to you. So let's begin with the rundown of the astrology. On Tuesday, July 25th, Pluto in Capricorn will be squaring the lunar nodes, which are currently in Aries and Libra. On Thursday, the 27th, Mercury in Leo will create a conjunction with Venus in Leo. Friday, the 28th, Mercury will trine the North Node and sextile the South Node. We also have on Friday another exact Pluto squaring the nodes configuration, and then Mercury will enter Virgo after having spent the last month or so in Leo. And so I want to briefly delineate the astrology from more of a technical perspective to paint a picture of what we may be working with this week. And then we will deepen into contemplating aspects of our internal and external experiences that this astrology can inspire us to consider. So I'm really going to be focusing mostly on Pluto squaring the nodes. And I'm going to paint a picture about why I think it's so important to be talking about this transit specifically. To me, we have a week that is sandwiched by these two exact Pluto squaring the lunar nodes situation. And this is significant. The last time we had Pluto squaring lunar nodes was in 2015. The same as it will be this coming week. Pluto was in Capricorn. The nodes were also in Libra Aries axis, right? So we may be seeing similarities to themes that were brought up during 2015 in our individual charts, maybe even in the collective. And it's also worth noting that we don't have another one of these configurations of Pluto squaring the nodes until 2032. But by the time we have it in 2032, it will have a totally different flavor. So Pluto will be in Aquarius while the nodes will be in Taurus Scorpio axis. So because it will be in different signs, different thematics will be activated. It's also worth noting that the last time Pluto was in Capricorn creating a square to the nodes in Aries Libra was in 1764. So literally 3 centuries ago, right? And then the next time will be in 2257, when I imagine that none of us listening to this will be alive anymore, right? So why am I taking the time to lay all of this out? Because I think this is really the time when we will be wrapping up certain stories and narratives around Capricorn, Aries, Libra, T-square as it pertains to Pluto and the nodes, right? And this to me feels like a big deal. I've been feeling a lot of these thematics in myself, in my clients and my students, and also in the collective. So let's get deeper into the implication of this, or what are some of the archetypal themes that may be excavated through this particular transit. A square, right, is considered a heart aspect in astrology. So when I was first starting to learn more about aspects, hearing the words heart aspect made me cringe a little bit, right? It was as if you were going to be doomed if you have a heart aspect in your chart, right? As if you were going to have, this horrible heart life. If you have like squares or oppositions, or even some traditions consider conjunctions as also a heart aspect within your birth chart or in your natal transits, right? And so I want to add a little bit of nuance that I have observed and learned through my practice with regard to squares. So I think of heart aspects versus easy aspects, right? So easy aspects are trines, which are 120 degrees, sextile 60 degrees, and that's it. And so I think of hard versus easy aspects more in terms of rhythm, more in terms of flow, right? There's a sense of amplification versus canceling out the flow of a thing. So when we have easy aspects like trines, for example, two planets tend to have an effect that encourages them to support one another, right? When we have a trine, at least exact trines, what we will see is that there will be two planets in the same element. And so in the signs that are in the same element, right? And so we will see kind of a supporting of each other's agenda, right? It's like having a friend that agreed with your argument, and not only that, they also bring even more nuanced points, right? That kind of support your point of view. Meanwhile, hard aspects kind of slow the flow, right? There's a bit of a friction, there's a little bit of tension, and hard aspects pull the planetary principles apart a little bit, right? It's like having a friend who disagreed with your argument, using the same metaphor. It creates a different stream. It redirects the current of the flow of the conversation. And so, as we can see from our human affairs, right? Having someone who agree with you all the time is not necessarily the best thing, right? It may feel really good in the moment, but it can also put blinders on you, right? You may be unable then to see where your blind spots are. You may not be able to see the things that you don't want to see because everybody in the room seems to agree, whereas having a friend who disagreed may be challenging in the moment, but it may also give you new perspectives, so long as that disagreement is rooted in respect, right? And rooted in truly caring for the well-being of another person, and not just imposing our own standards on another person, right? And so with Pluto squaring the nodes, what we may see come up is evidence from our external world that challenges, that questions, that can potentially make us doubt our internal sense and experience of what I'm framing as existential power. So what do I mean by existential power, right? What I mean here is not necessarily the kind of power that we exercise against or for another person. So when we think of power in the ways that we talk about power within our collective, I am really speaking from the perspective of the United States where I live. Often we think about power as, the power of the government, right? To decide the fate of the individuals who live within it or belong to that government, right? Or we think about dictators, exercising their power and taking away the rights of people, right? We think about the power of your company to fire you, or the power of your boss to give you a negative or a positive assessment, right? That's not really what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about existential power, right? What I mean by existential power is that there's a certain kind of power that is rooted in our very existence in this reality, right? One way to consider this in a mundane, neutral way is consider a conversation that you have within a group of friends, right? Or colleagues, or even within your family. If all of you were present in the room at a certain point in time, right, you might notice that the group is able to access certain kinds of dynamics, right? We may be able to talk about certain kinds of topics, right, in a certain kind of way. And then it is always an interesting experience for me to notice that, let's say, if I have a group of friends that consists of 5 people, and then one of them leaves the room, often things really shifted, right? Like on a subtle level, the energy shifts. We may even shift the topics that we're talking about. That, especially, it depends on, obviously, the personality of the person who just left the group, right? Or left the conversation. But there's always a qualitative difference, even if it's extremely subtle, right? And so there are just certain energetics, right? Certain topics that we can really only access when we have a certain configuration of people. So that's what I mean by existential power. There's power in your existence, right? There are things that will not be possible if you were not present. And so within the systems that we currently live in, right, within this capitalist, extractive labor systems we exist within today, it's really easy to think that we only contribute through our actions, right? Through the tangible product or service that we bring to the table. This is exemplified by, for example, if you look at children, right? Often children who are more internally directed, children who likes to sit there and reflect and consider and take in their environment, you see a lot of the times parents being like, stop sitting around and doing nothing, right? Do something. Depending on the household you live in, obviously, but there can be the sense of like, you can't just sit around and do nothing. What are you going to contribute to society, right? But I think we all know that this is absolutely not true, right? We have created a system that overvalues the actions that we take, the words that we say, etc., right? I'm not saying that our actions, our words, our thoughts don't matter, but there's also a more essential layer to our existence, right? Our presence as a body, as a spirit, as a personality impact the world around us. And so we impact the web of life that we find ourselves belonging to. From this perspective of understanding existential power, which is always inherent in you, as long as you are present and as long as you have a body, right? We as individuals bring a whole host of energy that impacts others regardless of our actions. And this energy, or the set of energies, right, does a lot of work. It may feel invisible. It may feel totally indirect sometimes, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not working. It doesn't mean that it's not impacting people on some level. And so the questions that I'm inviting us all to contemplate this week are, how is your mere existence? How is your presence impacting the world around you? What is the relationship between your existence, your presence, and the actions that you take? In other words, who are you beneath or separate from the actions you're able to take, the words you're able to say, the thoughts you're able to think? Essentially, what I want you to contemplate is contemplate on the essence of your being, of your existence, of your presence. Now, how does this relate to Pluto? Pluto often represents the underworld in astrology, right? But it's really important to understand the context of what the ancients, I'm just going to say the ancients, because it's not just the ancient Greeks, right? But other cultures also filter into or gets imported into this idea of the underworld. But the ancients, including the ancient Greeks, have a different concept, have a different cosmology around what the underworld represents. that is quite distinct from the version that we have imported from Christianity, from the church, from modernity. I've been learning from the scholarship of Kristen Mathis, who is a dear friend and an ancient Greek scholar, on the cosmology of the Orphic hymns. You may have heard about the Orphic hymns, right? Which is an ancient text that is often used or talked about within magical circles. And especially we've been learning about how the Orphic initiates, which is a subculture within ancient Greece, sees Pluto. And I want to share with you the link to the article on her Substack, which I believe is available to the public. But I'm going to summarize it a little bit here. So she noted that the underworld is, rather than thinking of it as like hell from the perspective of Christianity, the underworld is instead simply the fractal of the above world. Being in the underworld is not necessarily a punishment within the cosmology of the Orphics, but rather a necessity to the continuation of the general aliveness of the web of life, right? Meaning without death, there would be no compost, and without compost, there would be no life, right? So let me read you a quote from this article because I find it so insightful. And this article, again, I believe is available to the public. I find this article extremely insightful and so deeply enriching for my archetypal understanding of Pluto or Hades beyond how we understand it through what I consider kind of the pop version or the elementary school version of the mythology, right? Which again has its place, but certainly doesn't always feel quite 100% resonant for me. Like I always feel like when I hear about the mythology of Pluto, something about it, right, is missing, or something is inadequate for me, or I feel like there's a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. So it's quite a revelation for me to read this piece by Kristen because it seems to kind of fill in the gap that I've always felt was there. So before I read this, let me preface it by saying that earlier in the essay, Kristen opened this article by laying out how the Orphic cosmology is not necessarily subscribed to this idea of as above, so below, right? That we so often hear within many magical circles and traditions. Often this idea, especially superimposed on the modern idea of hierarchy that we have so deeply ingrained within our society, right, gives us a sense of hierarchy, right? That somehow the above is better than the below, or the above is preferable to the below. Instead, she calls their idea of the universe as animate fractals. And the way that I understand fractals, and this is me, Jonathan, speaking, is through nature, right? For example, you may have heard about the Fibonacci sequence, right? Which exists in human bodies, also in seashells, also in the structure of the Milky Way. There's a sense that the micro, right? The small things, the things that are so reachable that is just within our bodies, like the shape of our ears, right, represent or is connected to a grander scheme, a grander organizing principle or pattern that also exists in the universe, right? Or the way that our DNA is literally encoded within the structure of our individual strand of hairs, right? One strand of hair holds the code for all of the DNA sequence of the body, which is very neat. And so Kristen started off this article by explaining that the Orphics, they don't really interpret the division of the universe into the above and the underworld as evidence of hierarchy, but rather evidence that, this is in Kristen's word, that the Orphic fractals are polycentric, often rhizomatic structures that not only repeat themselves, but are reversible or invertible, right? Able to be observed and understood from different angles. And so on top of that, she also explains that the Orphics understands the universe as being alive. So not only is it a fractal, but it's an animate fractal, right? So this is directly from Kristen's essay. By now, it should be very obvious that the elementary school version of Greek myth, where Zeus is king of Olympus and all the other gods are arrayed at his feet, is not how the Orphic ancestors actually understood the cosmos. For the ancient Orphics, Hades, or the site of the underworld, was fractally related to everything above ground. We tend to read our modern notions of above and below as hierarchical, with above representing primacy, the good, etc. But for the ancients, Pluto is a fractal image of Zeus. No hierarchy implied, no primacy, nor are they even actually separate at a fundamental level. Mythically, this relationship is expressed by saying Zeus and Pluto are brothers. Fundamentally, Zeus and Pluto are simply repeating patterns or faces of the same living being. And that being has a primary purpose to liberate and sow life. So this to me is significant, right? Because oftentimes when we consider, and this is Jonathan speaking now, when we consider astrology, and even in a lot of modern branches of astrology, there is an undertone or an undercurrent of being afraid of Pluto, right? Of being afraid of the underworld. But what Kristen is saying here is that actually Zeus, which is again superimposed on our modern sensibility, is considered like hierarchically the king of the gods, right? Are actually simply brothers. Zeus and Pluto are simply brothers, right? And so she goes on to say, and this is me reading her words again, Zeus or Jupiter accomplishes this act of liberation and life through his body of light, visible in lightning. The planet Jupiter, seeds and sperm, and other phenomena associated with abundant life generation. As such, Zeus is understood as the ruler of the daytime cosmos, seated in the heavens above the earth, aka Mount Olympus in the myth. We see a fractal variant of Zeus's life-generating power every time we look at the sun, who draws plants upwards towards his light. Pluto, on the other hand, accomplishes the same mission of liberating and sowing life, but he does so through his body of shadows or shade. And for Orphics, Pluto's realm was just as necessary to the generation of life and liberty as Zeus. On a very literal level, anyone who has ever labored under the hot sun knows that shade, like light, is absolutely necessary for life to flourish. Shade grants us respite from the unwearying and parching effects of strong light and heat. When we're in the shade, we take a sip of lemonade or cold water, wipe our foreheads, and feel our strength renewed. It allows us a moment to recollect ourselves, to stand back and survey what we've done so far and chart our next steps. That's exactly what Pluto does in the Orphic cosmos. He shelters, renews, and refreshes. So that's a little excerpt from her free article, which I will again link in the show notes below, and you can read the entirety of it. It's really quite incredible in my own humble opinion. And if you are a mystical nerd like me, I think you're going to likely really want to subscribe to her Substack like super quickly, because I just get so excited thinking about this, right? So let's talk about this in relation to within the context of the astrology that we have in the coming week, right? I read this because I want to invite you to expand your idea of Pluto. Pluto is so often depicted as the scary thing, right? The scary archetype related to death in the underworld. Again, within our collective imagination, in modernity, we are so very influenced by the idea of hell and the gnashing of teeth, right? Like sinners go to hell, sinners get punished, hell is this never-ending suffering. And even if you didn't grow up with this framework directly, right? Even if your family wasn't like, church going necessarily, just check out any of the horror movies, right, produced by Hollywood, and you'll see how pervasive this cosmology is, right? And how it extends and roots itself down to all parts of our culture, right? what I think personally for me has been so incredible about learning about this Orphic cosmology is that I've also taken some underworld journeys, consciously on a spiritual level. And what I have found is that the underworld is not necessarily always explicit suffering. It can be. Sometimes it totally is, right? But often, personally, I found that it's not. It's actually living that's connected with suffering, right? Like, I don't think it's interesting because it kind of goes to that. It reminds me of this old saying, right? That like, you don't need to really worry about death because by the time death comes, you're already dead, right? It's interesting to think about how living is actually like the root of the suffering. A lot of the suffering that we experience is not suffering that's connected to death. It's actually suffering that's connected to being alive, right? When I think about the toil of labor without certain outcomes, or maybe with considerable risks about, maybe being exploited or being ambushed or being violated in some sense, I don't necessarily see it as fully connected to the underworld, right? It makes me think of Mars, actually. It makes me think about how Mars traditionally rejoices in the sixth house, right? Which is, the sixth house is often associated with the things that we need to do to keep our health, right? Our survival mechanisms, how we pay the bills, right? The things that we must do, the price we must pay for our existence. Or I also think about the 12th house. I think about suffering under some mysterious system that I can't fully trace, right? Fighting the invisible evil, sometimes what it feels like, right? Or greater systems of oppression that have come before me and can feel completely debilitating to think about because I don't even know where to start. Like when we think about greater systems of oppression like racism or like coloniality, right? Like, how do I even begin to tackle that? And when I think about that, I often think about Saturn and the 12th house, that which is hidden, right? Saturn in traditional astrology is rejoicing in the 12th house, that which is hidden, lacking form, lacking clarity, right? And so the underworld to me has a totally different flavor. When I consider the real underworld and when I consider Pluto in my spiritual journeying within my own practice, I actually experience the underworld as deep silence. Maybe this is just me, right? I'm not universalizing this, but I want to share this because I think this is a perspective, and it's interesting to see that perspective reflected in the Orphic cosmology for me personally. I experience the underworld as nothingness, as the void. I was just talking with my friend and one of my teachers, Madison Nees, about this, right? Last fall, I joined this group experience that Madison facilitated called katabasis. And katabasis is a Greek word that roughly translates to journey into the underworld, right? And I was telling Madison that what surprised me the most about going to the underworld is how fucking quiet it is. It's almost deafening, right? In its silence. It's reminding me of like this story in the Bible, right? In the New Testament, when Jesus or Rabbi Yeshua called out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" right? On the cross. It's like this experience of reaching out, asking like, please, greater power, universe, cosmos, meet me where I am. And then you hear nothing, right? It's the moments we just hear our own beating hearts, barely beating, right? That silence can be so deafening. The void is a place of terror for most of us, which is why practices like meditation, right? Despite the fact that there are so many classes, so many apps, so many teachers, so many tools out there that can feel almost overwhelming nowadays, yet creating a solid sense that we are held by our meditation practice can feel still incredibly elusive. We are not lacking resources, but we are still really afraid of that silence, right? We don't know how to be with the void. It's so easy, and we've been taught, this is exemplified and amplified by our culture, right? That doing is holds primacy over being, right? We don't know how to be with ourselves when we check in and we hear no answer. We don't know how to be with others when we ask them something and they don't have the answer, right? We get really activated. Like, I've had difficult conversations, for example, with my partner or with my friends, or with collaborators. And when there's nothing from their end and they don't have an emotional response to share with me, it can feel more enraging than when they get upset or they get really activated, right? This, to me, this incredible silence, this nothingness, to me, this is the underworld, right? So going back to Pluto squaring the nodes, to me, this is transit that can kind of bring us to our knees, right? It may point to major or minor eviscerations, abolishment, a kind of wiping out that may be necessary in order for us to determine what can continue in its aliveness and what needs to be composted, right? The Plutonic is often where we can experience powerlessness to the point of things feeling like total ego death, right? And in that death, we'll get to see what still remains and what may have a chance of returning back to life in a different form. If this sounds terrifying, of course it is, right? Nobody likes death. Nobody likes dying. Nobody likes major changes, right? Like, I was just talking to a beloved friend about making changes in her, in the way that she's been running her business. And it absolutely is terrifying because you just don't know what happens, right? And often in the period of transition, there's silence. There's a slowing down, and those moments of not feeling the momentum, the flow as we understand it, can be so scary, right? These can be the moments of being brought down to our knees. The author Elizabeth Gilbert calls these moments hearing the voice of God on the bathroom floor, right? When we're curled up on the bathroom floor and we just come to this realization that I can't do this any longer. That's death. When we actually become so deeply humbled, when we are so grounded, like we are so close to the ground. And to me, there's something really exciting too, because from that place of rock bottom, right, is where we can come alive, because it's precisely the urgency of the necessity to go under, to rest, to be in touch with that nothingness, to be so close to the quiet ground, right? That we can find whatever it is that we need to come back to aliveness. The underworld is where we get to strip away any and all armors that we've put up, right? The excessive, the unnecessary accessories and the makeup that we've lathered onto ourselves in order to appear a certain way to the outside world, right? The underworld is where we release our attachment to our masks. And so the nodes, right, represent our incarnational path, right? The nodes are where the sun and the moon and the earth align to create eclipses, right? And to me, the nodes are really the nexus point, the meeting of flesh and spirit and the human affairs, right? The worldly affairs. And with Pluto squaring the nodes, some very real, very tangible hurdle may be showing us where we need to completely retreat, where we need to completely take shelter in the void, right? In the nothingness. Maybe even allow aspects of ourselves or our way of relating to rot a little bit, right? And so to me, what this requires is a willingness to surrender to not knowing what to do, to not having the next steps, right? Being radically honest with ourselves about where we are, how we are feeling, and not making it mean anything more than what it is in the present moment, right? I also want to remind you that this deep void, this deep silent part within is also a really ancient part of us, right? It's often this untouched, the part of us that's untouched by specific forms of trauma, by the urgency of the external world, right? By the fear-driven reality created by constant news cycle and our colonial governments, right? For so many of us, We know intellectually the importance of finding, of cherishing, of taking refuge in the inner sanctuary, deep within ourselves, that can't be taken away from us, right? Again, this is why old mystical traditions are often rooted in meditation, in contemplation, because in those spaces, we find a quiet, still voice of God, of our inner knowing, of universe, of spirit, of our intuition, right? However, what can we do? What can we actually do to go within, to find that stillness? How can we allow ourselves to go into that underworld without resisting in order to find the rest that we needed? I often think that the underworld is not the place where we go to find answers. The underworld rather is a place where we unravel, right? Where we let go of how we've been conditioned in the outside world, what we've been taught we needed to be. And in the unraveling, in the unconditioning, in the rotting, space is born. And from that space, maybe something emerges. There's no guarantee, right? So even just this whole question of how do we allow ourselves to go into the underworld without resisting can take up years of inquiry, and it can have so many different answers, right? I'll share one with you to consider that has been coming up for me in my own practice, which is to seriously and deeply consider what in my journey, right? What in my current reality are really for me, what questions and concerns are meant for me to be working with, to be digesting, to be tending to. And there are two simple phrases that I want to share with you from a couple different teachers that I've studied with over the years. One is from Pilar Lesko, and Pilar has one of the phrases that really stuck out for me from Pilar's practice is, whose pain is that? Whose suffering is that, right? Be discerning about whether you are carrying pain that is truly yours or others, right? And I'll speak more on that later. And then the other invitation is from another teacher, Deborah Cremens, who often would ask us, is this yours or somebody else's? Right? And continuing, to me, these practices, right, of asking these questions is a continual practice. You don't just ask it in the beginning of your day and then be done, right? I ask these questions throughout the day, multiple times a day, and it's helped me tremendously. One thing that I've continued to come back to over and over again is the fact that our practice is here for us, right? Our spiritual practices are here for us to more deeply engage with the facets of our lives that are uniquely for us to engage with. When we start taking in questions or concerns or energies that are not ours, the reality is that we start to bite off more than we can chew. I want to bring in an analogy here that I think all of us can understand on a physical level. Right? With regards to our physical bodies, we know for a fact that eating the wrong quantity of food or eating the wrong type of food can be absolutely toxic, absolutely dangerous for us. You wouldn't consider eating a mushroom that you know to be toxic, or to consume alcohol at an amount that's much, much larger than what the human body can handle, because you know that it may lead to death, right? When you take in food at the wrong quantity or the wrong type of food into your body, it may cause toxicity, right? It may cause your system to collapse. It may even lead to death. So the same principle actually works for us on an energetic level. When we are not discerning about what we are here to engage with, and I think most of us haven't really been fully trained or even encouraged to be discerning about that in the first place, right? When we're not discerning about what we're here to heal or to redirect or to tend to, right? We can end up taking more than what we're capable of. We can end up trying to process and digest energies that are not really ours to process and digest. For me, often, and I want you to feel into why or when or how this tends to happen for you. But for me, I noticed that here are the two most common reasons I see myself taking in stuff that's not really mine to take on, right? Reason number one is I mistakenly believed that I am not only responsible, but in charge, or I even have the agency, the ability to get into another person or another entity and their own healing process. Or number two, some part of me is deeply afraid that if I don't take in this person's suffering as my own, I won't get the belonging, the love, the acceptance, the validation from them, right? In other words, I take on energies that are not really mine to digest, thought forms, considerations, concerns, when I believe that I must deny myself of my own self-sovereignty from my own existential power, right? The power and the value of my mere existence in exchange for the love that I believe this person can offer. So, again, what I want to offer up to you are these questions. Whose pain are you holding on to right now? Whose sufferings are you experiencing? Is it yours or is it someone else's? Or perhaps more in a more nuanced way, right? Or more detailed way, what aspects of those pain and suffering are yours to carry? Yours to tend to, yours to heal and to transmute, and which aspects are yours or are you holding on to simply because you're afraid that not holding on to them makes you a bad person, makes you not caring, makes you worth any less than the full inherent perfection that you always already are? And if once you cultivate this honesty and awareness for yourself, if you find yourself ready to release what is not yours to digest, I welcome you to put both hands on your heart. Maybe you can even try this right now. Maybe even close your eyes and slowly apply gentle pressure on your heart. I like to imagine these energies releasing into the universe, gifted back to whoever it belongs to. Allowing them to digest these energies because they will know how to digest energies that are theirs. Or maybe even envision them being released back into the belly of the earth, into the domains of Pluto, to allow Pluto to compost this energy into some other energies, right? Allow Pluto to discern which of these energies that are clearly not yours, which of these are nutritive or needs to be moved through a particular specific process to be turned into nutrition. Imagine your body letting go of these energies, and then invite in more of your own energies to return to your body. Allow yourself to place your full attention on that which is yours to carry, that which is yours to care for, that which is uniquely yours to transform into more aliveness, more pleasure, more grace, more love. All right, that is it by way of contemplation. I hope that gives you something to consider, to think about, to work with for the coming week. As always, if you feel called to have a reading with me, to have me hold space for you for whatever is moving through you, I will be excited to do so. I will be excited to hold space, to collaborate with you in attuning, listening to what your birth chart might have for you, what wisdom it might want to impart to you, or the Akashic records. And if you have been enjoying this podcast, I would love it if you could rate and review this podcast. It's so helpful for me. This project is free and is available to everyone and anyone who would like to tune in, who feels like it would be supportive every single week. And so I really would love your help in leaving a review. It can be super short. It can be 4 to 5 sentences, more than enough. And it's so helpful in helping others find this podcast. So if you have left a review, thank you. If you are considering doing that, I thank you, and I would love to receive your reviews. I hope you have a beautiful week ahead of you. Whatever it is that you're moving through, I hope that you find solace in the inherent, ancient part within you that is always able to access that underworld stillness. And I am sending you so much love, so much care. And until we meet again, I wish you the best. Thank you so much for listening.